there you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour then, we'll see what's making the headlines with the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Great to see both of you. So as ever, let's kick off with the front pages. The nurses' pay dispute leads the eye with a warning from hospital bosses that the stalemate needs to be broken because the backlog in the care system is so serious. The Express quotes one NHS leader criticising nurses who refused to staff a struggling intensive care ward despite management pleas. The Guardian returns to the Channel migrants crisis and says the Home Office is to acquire a fleet of ships to house asylum seekers coming to the UK before they are processed. The collapse of another US bank, this time First Republic, and its takeover by JP Morgan is top story for the Financial Times. Crown the Hatch, the Metro begins the final countdown to the coronation with news that 652 million pints of beer will be drunk in celebration, making £120 million profit for the country's pubs. The Daily Mail, meanwhile, carries a poll which finds that support for the royal family is rock solid, but that the institution does need some reform. Look who's pictured too. And the Daily Star says Sir David Attenborough is the nation's favourite to lead any talks with beings from another planet, should they ever get in touch. Let's hope they don't. Anyway, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. So let's head straight to our guests then, Steve Richards and Salma Shah. And Salma, you kick off with the eye then, making the case of the impact of the strikes that we've seen with nurses today. More than 500,000 appointments and procedures already hit by strikes, with a waiting list now of 7.2 million patients, suggesting hospital bosses are desperate.
Yes, and this is an interesting story and an interesting take from the eye, because there's been generally quite a lot of support for striking NHS workers, but the management at these hospitals and these institutions are now obviously making a statement about how difficult it's going to be to manage this. We've already had the backlog from the pandemic, and now this is bringing more stress to acute services. In fact, the president of the Royal Society of Acute Treatment has called this an eternal winter. So there is some really stark language being used there. And I think it is because we're having this discussion about pay tomorrow and whether the NHS workers, nurses in particular, are going to accept a 5% pay deal. This has been something that is a little bit of a push, I think, to get people moving and back into the hospitals.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the RCN leader today said, let's not just talk about staffing or acute staffing shortages on strike days. That's an everyday occurrence in the NHS. But meanwhile, if we head to the Metro, or the inside pages of the Metro, Steve, this idea of a big meeting tomorrow and that there could be an imposition of the pay award. Does that also focus minds, do you think? Tell us about that.
Well, it's the later stage in this extraordinary dispute. I mean, nurses don't normally go on strike. Remember, the context of this is that they have rejected a pay proposal that was actually backed by their leadership, the union leadership. So some of them, I think, are pretty desperate because of all kinds of things. It's not just the inflation rate, it's the cost of housing in parts of Britain. There are a whole series, cost of transport, a whole series of things that frankly aren't working very well in this country that have led to this position. But the wider context is urgent, as Salma suggests, you know, in analysing other front pages. I mean, we had the coalition policy from 2010 of very tight NHS budgets. We've then had the pandemic, and, you know, we've had staff shortages for years now. And remember, one of Sunak's kind of 5 missions or pledges, or however they're described, is to address the waiting lists. And up they go. So there's a real urgency around these talks tomorrow on both sides of the metaphorical table.
Yes, and on Tuesday it will be health unions, a number of health unions, ministers and NHS bosses discussing that pay offer of 5%. The Health Secretary, Salma, already suggesting that the Royal College of Nursing's decision to press ahead with its strike was disrespectful to the other unions involved. They, of course, hit their 6-month mandate deadline, as we know, because of court action, having to call it off a day earlier. But what will happen, do you think, on Tuesday? Will we see a majority vote for the current pay offer? And if so, what does that mean for unions who are seeking a further mandate from their members to strike more?
Well, this is interesting because there is a lot of negotiation that happens behind the scenes in these circumstances and instances. And I think that is going to be really working through rapidly this evening as to what the positions are going to be around the distinct unions and their interactions with each other. But I think ultimately you can take it to a point where there is all these headlines and a lot of pressure coming from lots of different places and still not get a deal because people are really entrenching into their positions. And you're seeing a heightened language both from the Secretary of State and the nursing unions. So it doesn't feel like this is going to be the opening for a majority vote. However, never say never. There could be a lot of people who want to get back to work. I mean, we are talking about the care sector and people who want to help their patients. So there could be a break as far as the membership is concerned. But the way that the leadership on both sides are talking, it doesn't look like the impasse is going to occur.
Lots of coverage about this. Let's take a look at the Express as well. It picks up on NHS unions ignoring a plea for life and limb care. This happened at Colchester Hospital, we understand. It involved an intensive care unit. Life and limb care had been promised, had it not. But it just shows how fractious it's getting, just briefly, Steve, doesn't it?
Yeah, and how difficult it is sometimes to define these terms absolutely clearly. So those on strike can provide the cover they say they will, and so on. This is what happens when industrial action deepens for whatever reason. And this is deepening. And I think, for example, the RCN leadership are in something of a dilemma. They can't recommend an agreement to their members and get it rejected again. So they have to be really sure. And that's one of the many calculations that are being made tonight and will no doubt seep through in these discussions tomorrow. But the ministers need these nurses back and say it's one of Sunak's pledges. And actually what's happening is that the waiting lists are growing.
And certainly Colchester Hospital suggesting that they had to significantly reduce their capacity in the intensive care unit, meaning only one patient could be admitted on Sunday night. So great difficulty for many different parts of various hospitals because of the strike action. We'll see what happens, obviously, on Tuesday. Let's move on to The Guardian. Now, back to migration and asylum seekers. Pippa Crerar, the political editor, with what she says is an exclusive here, Salma, that the Home Office is to get up to 10 disused cruise liners, ferries and barges to tackle processing delays. So talk us through this.
Yeah, so it's this idea that obviously with the influx of migration and particularly the acute issue of small boats coming across the channel, that the Home Office is now scrambling to find accommodation for migrants. And this is going to be a huge list, all the way from disused prisons to military sites and these ships, which of course is going to create a lot of consternation. Lots of refugee charities in particular will have issue with this. But it does speak to the fact that the Prime Minister's original pledge back in January, was about dealing with the small boats and, by extension, immigration issues. Now, they can't get lots of Tory MPs or indeed many MPs to want to accept people into their communities, so they are looking for other options, and the boats seem to be one part of what they might do to house migrants that are coming in.
Yes, the suggestion is that the next place will be Liverpool, hopefully after they've hosted the Eurovision Song Contest, Steve. But anyway, next in line, it comes as ministers confirmed plans to house about 400 migrants on a barge in Dorset, trying to allay concerns from Tory backbenchers over the use of hotels in their constituencies. And the suggestion is that these 10 vessels, at a cost of millions of pounds to the taxpayer, I mean, they're floundering around, aren't they, because the backlog is so enormous?
Yeah, this is getting sort of darkly silly. I think the last time we were on, they announced one particular boat, and the MPs in the area where the boat was going to be moored was against the boat being moored in their area. And on it goes. I mean, in one of the papers, they're going to use oil rigs, and then what else? Castles. You know, the problems are so deep, and in a way, this issue of supply as well. I mean, what's going to happen? You know, the Sky quite a lot today have been leading with Sudan. That's going to lead, if people can get out and people are desperate to get out, to people from Sudan coming over here and so on. So there's a much deeper issue about what you do about people moving away from areas of crisis and emergency. And in a way, this kind of putting them in boats, putting them on oil rigs and all the rest of it, to the point where every boat in Britain will be occupied, is just not really getting to the nub of this. Now, maybe it will help speed up processes, who knows? But you get a hint of kind of desperation in all of this because there has been this, again, a Sunak pledge to sort out the boats.
Yes, and The Guardian suggesting that Whitehall sources said Suella Braverman was close to confirming a deal for an 1,800 capacity former cruise ship to house migrants that would be berthed in the Mersey, suggesting that the port infrastructure around Birkenhead would go ahead only if the plans had full engagement with the local council. So we watch and see with that one as well, but some big plans there. Now, we've talked about strike action here, peaceful picket lines. Not so much in France, though, where people are still smarting at the pushing through of pension reforms by President Macron, Salma. And effectively, we're being told by a correspondent, the loss of democracy is what has so agitated people there.
Yes, and this is something that was sort of predicted when President Macron suggested pension reforms. You know, bits from that we've already sort of taken on in terms of increasing the retirement age. And even though we're talking about strikes in this country and it being difficult, this is nothing compared to what's happening in Paris at the moment, where riot police are on the street, and you can see the pictures there. And the fact that this doesn't seem to show any sign of resolution at any point soon. People are very angry about the way that President Macron has brought in these changes, seemingly without enough consultation with workers. And certainly their May Day holiday, which most people enjoy, has turned into a bit of carnage, really, on the streets of Paris today.